So let me begin by saying thank you to all of you for what has been a rather remarkable 3 years of unexpected 3 years of my life and our life together with Donna. Someone asked me, we were talking last night about this. I said, well, in some ways, how do you feel about coming to the end? And I said, well, I feel like I haven't been here from the beginning. Because it seems like I was in the midst of getting the hang of retirement and not doing it very well. And God said, go there. So I did. And now I go back. But I really can't afford to go back because so much has happened in the meantime for me personally. I told the Tuesday night group, I know you're thanking me for being here and all that I have maybe been to you, but I go home with about 100 more of you of what you've been to me. And so who's the richer in that process? There's a lovely phrase found in the New Zealand prayer book that's for use in the night prayers. What has been done has been done. What has not been done has not been done. Let it be. You see how that's a prayer fitting for each day? Well, it's also a prayer fitting for any project or process or call. Last night we reflected how a simple invitation to supply for Amy's sabbatical became so much more. We were flexible and we were adaptable as we responded to everything that happened from that fateful invitation so many years ago. Everything. And the experience among you has become something much deeper than any form of just supplying for a sabbatical. God was at work, doing more than rescuing this newly retired bishop from myself. I think sometimes our vision, our time together had its process, its purpose, because it had something to do with coming out of COVID. How does a church come out of COVID? How does a bishop see what he did to a church by all their regulations about the church in the course of COVID, except by seeing a church coming out of COVID? It's about accentuating what you already do well together, about your prayerfulness. We were kind of late for the service today because we had a whole host of intercessors in the sacristy. We have to get round all of them. So it's about accentuating your small groups, your prayerfulness, your spiritual curiosity. I have a whole box of books that I have to take home with me. From small groups. And from people saying, have you read this? Have you read that? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? There's a good podcast you should watch. It's only an hour and 23 minutes. And I think it's about exploring upside down church, which now I see, thanks to Phil Baxter saying, I don't like upside down church. So I said, Phil, what do you like? And we ended up talking about, he had a glass of wine in his hand. And I said, what's in that? He said, well, it's wine. I said, where did it come from? It came from grapes. Where did the grapes come from? From a vine. What's the most important part of a vine? Not what you see, but what you don't see. And don't we cull it back from every year, have to purge it of its fruitfulness to get stronger? And where's the leadership? Where's the energy of resourcing? Hidden under the ground, from bottom up, upside down church. And if that's an image that takes off, it ought to take off from Napa Valley. The energy comes from the roots and the soil. And each year as the vine is pruned back to its basics. And each year, in some senses, the church calendar does that with Lent and stuff. And Jesus knew what he was doing when he chose the vine and symbolized our relationship with his work and with his mission and with each other. We are poised to explore it as an organic community of the baptized in Christ. It's fitting that we will meet again the beginning of October as I come for your Church of the Future Forum as part of the 150th celebration. And in the midst of all of the difficulties and that we've had over the last, and uncertainties we've had over the last few years, you've raised money like very few churches can raise money. For the Sustaining Grace Fund, you've started and celebrating, planning the full celebration of your 150 years together. You began a common table, hosting a common table, vision of a common table for community in the church hall. You've expanded the work of the young families and the catechesis of the Good Shepherd young people and started to work with them into the aspect of how to form one another in this life in Christ. And we have acolytes. And we never know what's going to happen to these young people by what they do see and do up here. God only knows. So what does the Spirit of God leave us on this very special day? Where does the miracle, and I say the miracle of the lectionary, take us? Because that lectionary, all this list of readings that we do every week, we didn't just sit around on a Tuesday morning at staff meeting and say, well, what shall we read this week? We went deep into the past, maybe all the way down, all the way into the 16th century, and let Cranmer do some work for us and tell us today, on this special day, what we should read. And it's about a year since I came here for this final period together, because I remember Sarah giving a sermon on Amos and the plumb line. Rather like the recently unexpected appearance of the big screen on recent weeks, if you've noticed. God hangs a plumb line right down there in the midst of the people. And I asked the question if they're out of line with God's will and ways, and the answer in Amos is yes. And we've had wobbles, and we've had changes, and we've had adaptation, we've had stress, and we have anxiety before the unknown, and the temptations of even going it alone. Not only among ourselves, but also in this world at large. Things are shaking, but are the walls staying together? Do they measure well against the purposes and the expectations of God as we know them? Are we as the temple of God well aligned with God's purpose? In Thanksgiving, I think we can say with God's help, yes. The plumb line is there against one of the most, is set against in the lectionary one of the most familiar stories in the Gospels that Jesus ever told. We could have probably just recited it out loud as Diana read the Gospel this morning. The Good Samaritan. The story that depicts what exactly does it mean to love God with all your heart and soul and strength and mind and your neighbor as yourself. The very thing in which the law and the prophets was based. The very thing which declares mercy and kindness as the center of things. God's plumb line. Everything we do, everything we think, everything we imagine. And everyone gets the story. I came across in a commentary this particular reference to the novelist Kurt Vonnegut, who, when he was approached by an anxious young man who asked him if everything will be all right, "Please tell me," said this young man, will we all be all right?" And Vonnegut replied, "Welcome to Earth, young man. It's hot in the summer. It's cold in the winter. It's round, it's wet, it's crowded. And at the outside, Joe, you've got about 100 years here. There's only one rule I know of. God damn it, Joe, you've got to be kind. God damn it, Joe, forgive me for my blasphemy. God damn it, Joe, you've got to be kind." Jesus was going deeper than that and wider than that. As the hymn says, "For the love of God is broader than the measure of the mind, and the heart of the eternal is most wonderfully kind." God drops down the plumb line of loving mercy and lines us all against it. Whatever we declare as truth, as righteousness, as peace, as justice, all are outcomes of the being where love abides and where love reigns. And we may be tempted, like King Charles III when he was the younger prince, to ask the question, but what is love? What is love? In a conversation with Jim Haslip about the state of the world over dinner, Jim considered that the highest percentage of people, if coming across a person in need, are likely to stop and try and help. Almost everyone. He didn't add this, but I add this, if alone. If a group of people do it, we look around. Who's going to go first? If a group of people do it, we might look around and say, well, are they one of us or one of them? We might hesitate as a group, but as individuals, we will not hesitate. This is in spite of the tendency to pursue our consumer competitiveness in society, to see ourselves made up of winners and of losers. With individuals, as individuals, when faced with someone else's distress, we would act or seek to. And isn't that Jesus' point? We can go into the details of his contrast with the Jews and the Samaritans and the priests and the lawyers. We can go into all that and get ourselves all worked up. And the church had sort of meanings behind each one of those symbols within the story over time. But isn't what Jesus really saying is that our nature is inclined to good. Our nature is inclined to good. For we are made in the image of goodness itself. We are made in the image of love itself in our Creator God. And even the most despised of strangers are made from the same divine stuff. In our studies that we've been doing recently of Rowan Williams' books, and especially the one that he wrote, Being Disciples, that we just, a group of us have been reading recently. Rowan Williams, that Welsh theologian, says in terms of faith and public life, every human being, he says, has a primary relationship with God, a primary relationship with God. It's not just with our parents. It's not just with our friends. It's not even just with ourselves. Our primary relationship is with God. And so our relating to one another is through that understanding. That whatever we're doing, or however we're responding, however we are to another human being, that is a person in whose ear God whispers. And often God whispers sweet nothings in that ear. And our respect, our treatment, our way with that person stems from that relationship, our understanding, our acceptance, and knowledge of that relationship. We know that. We know God is present with people that we have cast aside. What about the powerful swell of hope-filled spirituals that came about in the black tradition out of the cruel plight of enslavement? Nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows but Jesus. How did they come to that? If Jesus wasn't whispering, I am with you, in the midst of their slavery. There's a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. It's why the blood of the martyrs, said Tertullian in the 3rd century AD, was called the seed of the church. God lived among them. God lives in Gaza. God lives in Ukraine. God even lives in Alligator Alcatraz. God forgive us. Phil Baxter gave me a book called The Bells of Nagasaki, a personal account by a Dr. Takashi Nagai of his experiencing the fall of the atomic bomb on his city in August 1945. He didn't reflect upon it. He managed to tell us, at first a minute by minute, then an hour by hour, then a day by day accounting of the experience, because it fell on his city, near his university medical center where he was working. And he tells how they have to try, they didn't know what had happened. Except they saw and they felt the impact of a flash, and of a wind, a deadly fireball, and the fallout of radiation disease. He tells how his colleagues sought to come together through all of that dust and all of that chaos, stepping over, discovering so many dead bodies of their colleagues, and yet sought to extend their healing calling to that horrendous moment. They gathered as a team and they tried to help all those they could help that they came across. They tried to bring them to a place that they thought would be safe from the fireballs that were happening around them. And they did all that while eventually having to negotiate the emotions of becoming victims and at the same time a defeated people. The nation is ruined, he says, yet the mountains and the rivers remain. The unshakable belief in Japan's divine destiny, he says, had crumbled in an instant. And now under the clear blue morning sky, American planes roamed freely unchallenged. The war was truly over, we had lost. We're doing nothing today, someone said. And after breakfast, we sprawled on the floor, staring at the clouds, the forest, the plains. We had no will to move. They were inflicted with radiation disease. The rice bowls and the plates remained untouched by the hearth. Then a message came from a patient asking us to visit. What patient, I thought? The nation has fallen. All of Japan is mourning. What does 1 or 2 lives matter now? Refusing the request, we sent them away coldly. That day, everyone was irritable. The smallest thing could set us off. The messenger turned back, defeated, disappearing through the ginger fields, and I lay still. and watched his lonely figure fade into the distance. Then I slowly sat up and called my friend. Please bring that man back. Something inside had shifted. We must save this life. Japan may have surrendered, but the wounded are still alive. The war may be over, but our work as a medical relief team is not. The country may have perished, but medicine still stands. Our duty begins now. The rise and fall of nations have nothing to do with the lives of individuals. Life itself is sacred. You've done it through the wildfires. The people of Kerrville are doing it right now in the devastation of their floods. So what about the priest? What about the scribe? Amy Levine says that if you want to find out who the scribe, who the priest, who the Good Samaritan is, ask yourself two questions. See yourself in the ditch and ask yourself first and foremost, who would you rather die in front of than be helped by? What group of people do you really hope don't come to help you? And then ask yourself, who would rather see you in the ditch and let you die? Which group would rather do that? And she says that's how you get into the context, updated context of Jesus' story of the Good Samaritan. One commentator defined a distinction, which I think is really helpful, between seeing the law as gospel, the means by which we fulfill God's ends is to keep the law. That's where the priest stood. That's where the scribe stood. And to see the gospel as law. One limits who we can be good to, and restricts our movements. But if we give ourselves to the gospel as law, as Paul Lehman writes, when we seek to live as if the gospel is law, we set down a road not knowing where we are going. We travel by grace as radically vulnerable disciples. We set out to respond to the human in the other along the way. And the other calls forth obedience of faith in a world made and redeemed for us humans to be in. In law as gospel, we're in control. We're the actor. In gospel as law, we are acted upon by love. We are acted upon by love. That's where Jesus wanted to take the young ruler. He wants us to take where he wants to take us in this story. To break us apart, really, to the bare bones, to prune us like the vine, till what can grow out of us is growing out of his love, and not out of our tribalism and our affiliations, but out of our sheer understanding of what a human being is and how a role towards them needs to be. Rowan Williams, in the same book, says there's a second principle for guiding our paths in public life as Christians. And that's to recognize our interdependence upon each other, that we need each other. We need the gifts each other brings to one another. We need each other. Where have you heard that before? She's not here today. But where have you heard that before? God, we cannot live without you. And we cannot live without one another. You know you've become part of Grace Church when in your farewell sermon you're quoting Helen Christensen. But that's Jesus' invitation. That's Jesus' invitation. And that parable and this story is Jesus' Nike sermon. He in return asks the young man, well, who was the neighbor in the story? And the young man asks, the one who showed mercy. When done go, do likewise. Just do it. Amen.